Part 4. The aim of therapy is not to correct the past, but to enable the patient to confront his own history and to grieve over it. Alice Miller. Chapter 1. I closed Alicia's diary and placed it on my desk. I sat there, not moving, listening to the rain pelting outside the window. I tried to make sense of what I had just read. There was obviously a great deal more to Alicia Berenson than I had supposed. She had been like a closed book to me. Now that book was open and its contents had taken me altogether by surprise. I had a lot of questions. Alicia suspected she was being watched. Did she ever discover the man's identity? Did she tell anyone? I needed to find out. As far as I knew, she only confided in 3 people, Gabriel, Barbie, and this mysterious Dr. West. Did she stop there or did she tell anyone else? Another question. Why did the diary end so abruptly? Was there more written elsewhere? Another notebook, which she didn't give to me? And I wonder about Alicia's purpose in giving me the journal to read. She was communicating something, certainly, and it was a communication of almost shocking intimacy. Was it a gesture of good faith, showing how much she trusted me, or something more sinister? There was something else, something I needed to check. Dr. West, the doctor who had treated Alicia, an important character witness with vital information on her state of mind at the time of the murder. Yet, Dr. West hadn't testified at Alicia's trial. Why not? No mention was made of him at all, until I saw his name in her diary. It was as if he didn't exist. How much did he know? Why had he not come forward? Dr. West. It couldn't be the same man. It had to be a coincidence. Surely, I needed to find out. I put the diary in my desk drawer, locking it. Then almost immediately I changed my mind. I unlocked the drawer and took out the diary. Better keep it on me, safer not to let it out of my sight. I slipped it into the pocket of my coat. I left my office. I went downstairs and walked along the corridor until I reached a door at the end. I stood there for a moment, looking at it. A name was inscribed on a small sign on the door, Dr. C. West. I didn't bother to knock. I opened the door and went inside. Chapter 2. Christian was sitting behind his desk, eating takeaway sushi with chopsticks. He looked up and frowned. Don't you know how to knock? I need a word. Not now. I'm in the middle of lunch. This won't take long. Just a quick question. Did you ever treat Alicia Berenson? Christian swallowed a mouthful of rice and gave me a blank look. What do you mean? You know I do. I'm in charge of her care team. I don't mean here. I mean before she was admitted to the Grove. I watched Christian closely. His expression told me all I needed to know. His face went red and he lowered the chopsticks. What are you talking about? I took out Alicia's diary from my pocket and held it up. You might be interested in this. It's Alicia's journal. It was written in the months leading up to the murder. Christian looked surprised and a little alarmed. Where the hell did you get that? Alicia gave it to me. I read it. What's it got to do with me? She mentions you in it. Me? Apparently you were seeing her privately before she was admitted to the Grove. I wasn't aware of that. I don't understand. There must be some mistake. I don't think so. You saw her as a private patient over several years, and yet you didn't come forward to testify at the trial, despite the importance of your evidence. Nor did you admit you already knew Alicia when you started working here. Presumably, she recognized you straight away. It's lucky for you she's silent. I said this dryly, but I was intensely angry. Now I understood why Christian was so against my trying to get Alicia to talk. It was in his every interest to keep her quiet. You're a selfish son of a bitch, Christian, you know that? Christian stared at me with an increasing look of dismay. Fuck, he said under his breath. Fuck. Theo, listen, it's not what it looks like. Isn't it? What else does it say in the diary? What else is there to say? Christian didn't answer the question. He held out his hand. Can I have a look at it? Sorry, I shook my head. I don't think that's appropriate. Christian played with his chopsticks as he spoke. I shouldn't have done it, but it was entirely innocent. You got to believe me. I'm afraid I don't. If it were innocent, why didn't you come forward after the murder? Because I wasn't really Alicia's doctor. I mean, not officially. I only did it as a favor to Gabriel. We were friends. We were at university together. I was at their wedding. I hadn't seen him for years until he called me, looking for a psychiatrist for his wife. She had become unwell following her father's death. And you volunteer your services? No, not at all. Quite the reverse. I wanted to refer him to a colleague, but he insisted I see her. Gabriel said Alicia was extremely resistant to the whole idea, and the fact I was a friend of his made it much more likely she'll cooperate. I was reluctant, obviously. I'm sure you were. Christian shot me a hurt look. There's no need to be sarcastic. Where did you treat her? He hesitated. My girlfriend's house. But as I told you, he said quickly, it was unofficial. I wasn't really her doctor. I rarely saw her. Every now and then, that's all. And on those rare occasions, did you charge a fee? Christian blinked and avoided my gaze. Well, Gabriel insisted on paying, so I had no choice. Cash, I presume? Theo, was it cash? Yes, but... And did you declare it? Christian bit his lip and didn't reply, so the answer was no. That was why he hadn't come forward at Alicia's trial. I wonder how many other patients he was seeing unofficially and not declaring the income from them. Look, if Michaelides finds out, I could lose my job. You know that, don't you? His voice had a pleading note, appealing to my sympathy, but I had no sympathy for Christian, only contempt. Never mind the professor. What about the medical council? You'll lose your license. Only if you say something. You don't need to tell anyone. It's all water under the bridge at this point, isn't it? I mean, it's my career we're talking about, for fuck's sake. You should have thought of that before, shouldn't you? Theo, please. Christian must have hated having to crawl to me like this, but watching him squirm provided me with no satisfaction, only irritation. I had no intention of betraying him to Diomedes, not yet anyway. He'll be much more used to me if I kept him dangling. It's okay, I said. No one else needs to know, for the moment. Thank you. Seriously, I mean it. I owe you one. Yes, you do. Go on. What do you mean? What do you want? I want you to talk. I want you to tell me about Alicia. What do you want to know? Everything. Chapter 3. Christian stared at me, playing with his chopsticks. He deliberated for a few seconds before he spoke. There's not much to tell. I don't know what you want to hear, or where you want me to start. Start at the beginning. You saw her over a number of years? No, I mean, yes. But I told you, not as frequently as you make it sound. I saw her 2 or 3 times after her father died. When was the last time? About a week before the murder. And how would you describe her mental state? Oh, Christian leaned back in his chair, relaxing now that he was on safer ground. She was highly paranoid, delusional, psychotic even. If she'd been like this before, she had a long-standing pattern of mood swings. She was always up and down, typical borderline. Spare me the fucking diagnosis. Just give me the facts. Christian gave me a wounded look, but decided not to argue. What do you want to know? Alicia confided in you. She was being watched, correct? Christian gave me a blank look. Watch? Someone was spying on her. I thought she told you about it. Christian looked at me strangely. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. What's so funny? You don't really believe that, do you? The peeping Tom spying through the windows? You don't think it's true? Pure fantasy. I should have thought that was obvious. I nodded at the diary. She writes about it pretty convincingly. I believe her. Well, of course she sounded convincing. I'd have believed her too if I hadn't known better. She was having a psychotic episode. So you keep saying. She doesn't sound psychotic in the diary, just scared. She had a history. The same thing happened at the place they lived before Hampstead. That's why they had to move. She accused an elderly man across the street of spying on her. Made a huge fuss. Turned out the old guy was blind. Couldn't even see her, let alone spy on her. She was always highly unstable, but it was her father's suicide that did it. She never recovered. Did she talk about him with you at all? Her father? Christian shrugged. Not really. She would always insist that she loved him and they had a very normal relationship. As normal as it could be, considering her mother killed herself. To be honest, I was lucky to get anything out of Alicia at all. She was pretty uncooperative. She was, well, you know what she's like. Not as well as you, apparently. I went on before he could interrupt. She attempted suicide after her father's death? Christian shrugged. If you like, that's not what I would call it. What would you call it? It was a suicidal behavior, but I don't believe she intended to die. She was too narcissistic to ever really want to hurt herself. She took an overdose, more for show than anything else. She was communicating her distress to Gabriel. She was always trying to get his attention, poor bastard. If I hadn't had to respect her confidentiality, I'll have warned him to get the hell out. How unfortunate for him that you're such an ethical man. Christian winced. Theo, I know you're a very empathetic man. That's what makes you such a good therapist, but you're wasting your time with Alicia Berenson. Even before the murder, she had precious little capacity for introspection, for mentalizing, or whatever you want to call it. She was entirely consumed with herself and her art. All the empathy you have for her, all the kindness, she isn't capable of giving it back. She's a lost cause, a total bitch. Christian said this scornfully and with absolutely no detectable empathy for such a damaged woman. For a second, I wondered if perhaps Christian was borderline, not Alicia. That would make a lot more sense. I stood up. I'm going to see Alicia. I need some answers. From Alicia? Christian looked startled. And how do you intend to get them? By asking her. I walked out. Chapter 4. I waited until after Diomedes disappeared into his office and Stephanie was in a meeting with the trust. Then I slipped into the goldfish bowl and found Yuri. I need to see Alicia. Oh, yes? Yuri gave me an odd look. But I thought the therapy was discontinued. It was. I need to have a private conversation with her, that's all. Right, I see. Yuri looked doubtful. Well, the therapy room is occupied. Dura is seeing patients there for the rest of the afternoon. He thought for a second. The art room is free if you don't mind meeting there. It'll have to be quick though. He didn't elaborate, but I knew what he meant. We had to be fast, so no one noticed and reported us to Stephanie. I was grateful Yuri was on my side. He was obviously a good man. I felt guilty for having misjudged him when we first met. Thanks, I appreciate this. Yuri grinned at me. I'll have her there in 10 minutes. Yuri was as good as his word. 10 minutes later, Alicia and I were in the art room, sitting opposite each other, across the pink splatter work surface. I perched on a rickety stool, feeling precarious. Alicia looked perfectly poised as she sat down, as if she were posing for a portrait or about to paint one. Thank you for this. I took out her diary and placed it in front of me, for allowing me to read it. It means a great deal to me that you entrusted me with something so personal. I smiled, only to be met by a blank expression. Alicia's features were hard and unyielding. I wondered if she regretted giving me the diary. Perhaps she felt a sense of shame at having exposed herself so completely. I left a pause, then went on. The diary ends abruptly, on a cliffhanger. I flicked through the journal's remaining empty pages. It's a little like a therapy together, incomplete, unfinished. Alicia didn't speak, she just stared. I don't know what I expected, but not this. I'd assumed giving me the diary signal a change of some kind, representing an invitation, an opening, an entry point. Yet here I was, back at square one, faced with an impenetrable wall. You know, I hope that having spoken to me indirectly through these pages that you might go one step further and speak to me in person. No response. I think you gave this to me because you wanted to communicate with me, and you did communicate. Reading this told me a great deal about you, how lonely you were, how isolated, how afraid, that your situation was a lot more complicated than I had previously appreciated. Your relationship with Dr. West, for instance. I glanced at her as I said Christian's name. I hoped for some kind of a reaction, a narrowing of the eyes, a clenched jaw, something, anything, but there was nothing, not even a blink. I had no idea you knew Christian West before you were admitted to the Grove. You saw him privately for several years. You obviously recognized him when he first came to work here, a few months after your arrival. It must have been confusing when he didn't acknowledge you, and probably quite upsetting, I imagine. I asked it as a question, but there was no reply. Christian seemed of little interest to her. Alicia looked away, bored, disappointed, as if I had missed some opportunity, gone down the wrong track. She had been expecting something from me, something I had failed to deliver. Well, I wasn't done yet. There's something else. The diary raises certain questions, questions that need answering. Certain things don't make sense, don't fit with information I have from other sources. Now that you allowed me to read it, I feel obliged to investigate further. I hope you understand that. I gave Alicia back the diary. She took it and rested her fingers on it. We stared at each other for a moment. I'm on your side, Alicia, I said eventually. You know that, don't you? She didn't say anything. I took that as a yes. Chapter 5. Kathy was getting careless. It was inevitable, I suppose. Having gotten away with her infidelity for so long, she started getting lazy. I returned home to find her about to go out. I'm going for a walk, she said, pulling out her trainers. I won't be long. I could use some exercise. Fancy some company? No, I need to practice my lines. I can test you on them if you like. No, Kathy shook her head. It's easier on my own. I just keep reciting the speeches, the ones I can't get my head around. You know, the ones in Act 2. I walk around the park repeating them aloud. You should see the looks I get. I had to give it to her. Kathy said all of this with perfect sincerity while maintaining constant eye contact. She was a remarkable actress. My acting was also improving. I gave her a warm, open smile. Have a nice walk. I followed her after she left the flat. I kept a careful distance, but she didn't even look back once. As I said, she was getting careless. She walked for about 5 minutes to the entrance of the park. As she neared it, a man emerged from the shadows. He had his back to me and I couldn't see his face. He had dark hair and was well built, taller than me. She went up to him and he pulled her close. They started kissing. Kathy devoured his kisses hungrily, surrendering herself to him. It was strange, to say the least, to see another man's arms around her. His hands groped and fondled her breast through her clothes. I knew I should hide. I was exposed and in plain sight. If Kathy turned around, she'd be sure to see me, but I couldn't move. I was transfixed, staring at a Medusa turned to a stone. Eventually, they stopped kissing and walked into the park, arm in arm. I followed. It was disorienting. From behind, from a distance, the man didn't look similar to me. For a few seconds, I had a confused out-of-body experience, convinced I was watching myself walking in the park with Kathy. Kathy let the man trowel a wooded area. He followed her into it and they vanished. I felt a sick feeling of dread in my stomach. My breathing was thick, slow, heavy. Every part of my body was telling me to leave. Go, run away. But I didn't. I followed them into the woods. I tried to make as little noise as possible, but twigs crunched under my feet and branches clawed at me. I couldn't see them anywhere. The trees grew so closely together that I could only see a few feet in front of me. I stopped and listened. I heard a rustling in the trees, but it could have been the wind. Then I heard something unmistakable, a low-pitched grotto sound I recognized at once. It was Kathy mowing. I tried to get closer, but the branches caught me and held me suspended, like a fly in a web. I stood there in the dim light, breathing in the musty smell of bark and earth. I listened to Kathy mowing as he fucked her. He grunted like an animal. I burned with hate. This man had come from nowhere and invaded my life. He had stolen and seduced and corrupted the one thing in the world that was precious to me. It was monstrous, supernatural. Perhaps he wasn't human at all, but the instrument of some malevolent deity intent on punishing me. Was God punishing me? Why? What was I guilty of, except falling in love? Was it that I loved too deeply, too needily, too much? Did this man love her? I doubted it. Not the way I did. He was just using her body. There was no way he cared for her as I did. I would have died for Kathy. I would have killed for her. I thought of my father. I knew what he'd do in this situation. He would murder the guy. Be a man. I could hear my father shouting, "Toughen up." Was that what I should do? Kill him? Dispose of him? It was a way out of this mess, a way to break the spell, release Kathy and set us free. Once she had grieved his loss, it would be over. He'll just be a memory, easily forgotten, and we could go on as before. I could do it now, here in the park. I'll drag him into the pond, plunge his head under water. I'll hold it there until his body converged and went limp in my arms. Or I could follow him home on the tub, stand right behind him on the platform, and with a sharp shove, push him in the path of an oncoming train. Or creep up behind him on a deserted street, clutching a brick, and bash out his brains. Why not? Kathy's moans grew louder suddenly, and I recognized the groans she made as she climaxed. Then there was a silence, interrupted by a muffled giggle I knew so well. I could hear the snapping of twigs as they tramped out of the woods. I waited for a few moments, then I snapped the branches around me and fought my way out of the trees, tearing and scratching my hands to shreds. When I emerged from the wood, my eyes were half blind with tears. I wiped them away with a bleeding fist. I lurched off, going nowhere. I walked round and round like a madman. Chapter 6. Jean Felix. No one was at the reception desk, and no one came when I called. I hesitated for a moment, then went into the gallery. I walked along the corridor to where the Alcestis was hanging. Once again I looked at the painting. Once again I tried to read it, and again I failed. Something about the picture defied interpretation, or else it had some kind of meaning that I had yet to comprehend. But what? Then a sharp intake of breath as I noticed something. Behind Alicia in the darkness, if you squinted and looked hard at the painting, the darkest parts of the shadows came together like a hologram that goes from 2 dimensions to 3 when you looked at it from a certain angle, and a shape burst forth from the shadows, the figure of a man hiding in the dark, watching, spying on Alicia. What do you want? The voice made me jump. I turned around. Jean Felix didn't look particularly pleased to see me. What are you doing here? I was about to point out the figure of the man in the painting and ask Jean Felix about it, but something told me it might be a bad idea. Instead, I smiled. I just had a couple more questions. Is now a good time? Not really. I told you everything I know. Surely there can't be anything else. Actually, some new information has come up. And what is that? Well, for one thing, I don't know Alicia was planning on leaving your gallery. There was a second pause before Jean Felix answered. His voice sounded tight, like a rubber band about to snap. What are you talking about? Is it true? What business is it of yours? Alicia is my patient. It's my intention to get her talking again, but I see now it might be in your interest if she remains silent. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Well, as long as no one knows of her wish to leave, you can hold on to her artwork indefinitely. What exactly are you accusing me of? I'm not accusing you at all, merely stating a fact. Jean Felix laughed. We'll see about that. I'll be contacting my lawyer and making a formal complaint to the hospital. I don't think you will. And why is that? Well, you see, I haven't told you how I heard Alicia was planning to leave. Whoever told you was lying. It was Alicia. What? Jean Felix looked stunned. You mean she spoke? In a way, she gave me her diary to read. Her diary? He blinked a few times as if he was having trouble processing the information. I didn't know Alicia kept a diary. Well, she did. She described your last few meetings in some detail. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. There was a heavy pause. Jean Felix was silent. I'll be in touch, I said. I smiled and walked out. As I emerged onto the Soho street, I felt a little guilty for ruffling Jean Felix's feathers like that, but it had been intentional. I wanted to see what effect the provocation would have, how he'll react, what he would do. Now I had to wait and see. As I walked through Soho, I phoned Alicia's cousin, Paul Rose, to let him know I was coming. I didn't want to turn up at the house unannounced and risk a similar reception to last time. The bruise on my head still hadn't fully healed. I cradled the phone between my ear and my shoulder as I lit a cigarette. I barely had time to inhale before the phone was answered on the first ring. I hoped it would be Paul, not Linda. I was in luck. Hello? Paul, it's Theo Faber. Oh, hello, mate. Sorry, I'm whispering. Mom's having her nap and I don't want to disturb her. How's your head? Much better, thanks. Good, good. How can I help? Well, I've received some new information about Alicia. I wanted to talk to you about it. What kind of information? I told him that Alicia had given me her diary to read. Her diary? I didn't know she kept one. What does it say? It might be easier to talk in person. Are you free today at all? Paul hesitated. It might be better if you don't come to the house. Mother isn't. Well, she wasn't too happy about your last visit. Yes, I gathered that. There's a pub at the end of the road, but by the roundabout. The White Bear. Yes, I remember it. That sounds fine. What time? Around 5? I should be able to get away for a bit. I heard Linda shouting in the background. Evidently, she had woken up. I have to go. I'll see you later. Paul hung up. A few hours later, I was on my way back to Cambridge on the train. I made another phone call to Max Berenson. I hesitated before calling. He already complained to Diomedes once, so he wouldn't be pleased to hear from me again, but I knew I had no choice. Tanya answered. Her call sounded better, but I could hear the tension in her voice when she realized who I was. Max is busy. He's in meetings all day. I'll call back. I'm not sure that's a good idea. I could hear Max in the background saying something, and Tanya reply. I'm not saying that, Max. Max grabbed the phone and spoke to me directly. I just told Tanya to tell you to fuck off. Ah, you got a nerve calling here again. I already complained once to Professor Diomedes. Yes, I'm aware of that. Nonetheless, some new information has come to light and it concerns you directly, so I felt I had no choice but to get in touch. What information? It's a journal Alicia kept in the weeks leading up to the murder. There was a silence at the other end of the line. I hesitated. Alicia writes about you in some detail, Max. She said you had romantic feelings for her. I was wondering if there was a click as he hung up. So far, so good. Max had taken the bait, and now I had to wait to see how he would react. I realized I was a little afraid of Max Berenson, just as Tanya was afraid of him. I remember her whisper advice to me to talk to Paul, to ask him something. What? Something about the night after the accident that killed Alicia's mother. I remember the look on Tanya's face when Max had appeared, how she fell silent and presented him with a smile. No, I thought, Max Berenson was not to be underestimated. That would be a dangerous mistake. Chapter 7. As the train approached Cambridge, the landscape flattened and the temperature dropped. I dipped up my coat as I left the station. The wind cut into my face like a volley of icy razor blades. I made my way to the pub to meet Paul. The White Bear was a ramshackle old place. It looked as if several extensions had been added onto the original structure over the years. A couple of students were braving the wind, sitting outside with their pints in the beer garden, wrapped up in scarves, smoking. Inside, the temperature was much warmer, thanks to several roaring fires, which provided a welcome relief from the cold. I got a drink and looked around for Paul. Several small rooms led off from the main bar, and the lighting was low. I peered at the figures in the shadows, unsuccessfully trying to spot him. A good place for an illicit rendezvous, I thought, which I suppose is what this was. I found Paul alone in a small room. He was facing away from the door, sitting by the fire. I recognized him at once on account of his sheer size. His huge back nearly blocked the fire from sight. Paul? He jumped up and turned around. He looked like a giant in the tiny room. He had to stoop slightly to avoid hitting the ceiling. All right, he said. He looked like he was bracing himself for bad news from a doctor. He made some room for me, and I sat down in front of the fire, relieved to feel its warmth on my face and hands. It's colder than London here. That wind doesn't help. Come straight from Siberia, that's what they say. Paul continued without pausing, clearly in no mood for small talk. What's this about a diary? I never knew Alicia kept a diary. Well, she did, and she gave it to you? I nodded. And what does it say? It specifically details the last couple of months before the murder, and there are a couple of discrepancies I wanted to ask you about. What discrepancies? Between your account of events and hers. What are you talking about? He put down his pints and gave me a long stare. What do you mean? Well, for one thing, you told me you hadn't seen Alicia for several years before the murder. Paul hesitated. Did I? In the diary, Alicia says she saw you a few weeks before Gabriel was killed. She says you came to the house in Hampstead. I stared at him, sensing him deflate inside. He looked like a boy suddenly, in a body that was much too big for him. Paul was afraid. It was obvious. He didn't reply for a moment. He shot me a furtive glance. Can I have a look at the diary? I shook my head. I don't think that would be appropriate. Anyway, I didn't bring it with me. Then how do I even know it exists? You could be lying. I'm not lying, but you were. You lied to me, Paul. Why? It's none of your business, that's why. I'm afraid it is my business. Alicia's well-being is my concern. Her well-being has got nothing to do with it. I didn't hurt her. I never said you did. Well then, why don't you tell me what happened? Paul shrugged. It's a long story. He hesitated, then gave in. He spoke quickly, breathlessly. I sensed his relief at finally telling someone. I was in a bad way. I had a problem, you know. I was gambling and borrowing money and not able to pay it back. I needed some cash to put everyone straight. And so you asked Alicia, did she give you the money? What does the diary say? It doesn't. Paul hesitated, then shook his head. No, she didn't give me anything. She said she couldn't afford to. Again, he was lying. Why? How did you get the money then? I took it out of my savings. I appreciate it if you kept this between us. I don't want my mother to find out. I don't think there's any reason to involve Linda in this. Really? Some colors came back into Paul's expression. He looked more hopeful. Thanks, I appreciate that. Did Alicia ever tell you she suspected she was being watched? Paul lowered his glass and gave me a puzzled look. I could see she hadn't. Watched? What do you mean? I told him the story I had read in the diary about Alicia's suspicions she was being watched by a stranger and finally her fears that she was under attack in her own home. Paul shook his head. She wasn't right in the head. You think she imagined it? Well, it stands to reason, doesn't it? Paul shrugged. You don't think someone was stalking her? I mean, I suppose it's possible. Yes, it is possible. So I presume she said nothing to you about it? Not a word. But Alicia and I never talked much, you know. She was always pretty silent. We all were, as a family. I remember Alicia saying how weird it was. She'll go to friends' houses and see other families laugh and joke and have conversation about things, and our house was so silent. We never talked, apart from my mom giving orders. And what about Alicia's father, Vernon? What was he like? Vernon didn't really talk much. He wasn't right in the head. Not after Eva died. He was never the same after that. Neither was Alicia, come to that. That reminds me, there was something I wanted to ask you. Something Tanya mentioned to me. Tanya Berenson? You spoke to her? Only briefly. She suggested I talk to you. Tanya did? Paul's cheeks colored. I don't know her well, but she's always been very kind to me. She's a good, very good person. She visited me and Mom a couple of times. A smile appeared on Paul's lips and he looked far away for a moment. He has a crush on her, I thought. I wonder how Max felt about that. What did Tanya say? He asked. She suggested I ask you about something that happened the night after the car accident. She didn't go into detail. Yes, I know what she means. I told her during the trial. I asked her not to tell anyone. She didn't tell me. It's up to you to tell me if you wish to, of course. If you don't want to. Paul drained his pint and shrugged. It's probably nothing, but it might help you understand Alicia. He hesitated and fell silent. Go on. Alicia. The first thing Alicia did when she got home from the hospital, they kept her in for a night after the crash, but she climbed up onto the roof of the house. I did too. We sat up there all night, pretty much. We used to go there all the time, Alicia and me. It was our secret place. On the roof? Paul hesitated. He looked at me for a second, deliberating. He made a decision. Come on, he stood up. I'll show you.